Go
Howard,
ahead.
thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
Can you share a little bit with me and the audience about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I am Howard Goodman. I have a doctorate in cyber operations from Dakota State University. I work for Skybox Security, as well as I'm also an adjunct professor teaching graduate courses and helping a lot of adults learn cybersecurity.
Awesome. And one thing that I always ask my cybersecurity guests, the people that are in counter fraud and counter spam scam space, is have you ever been a victim of fraud, a scam, or a cybersecurity incident? Because if you and I can't get it right 100% of the time, people who don't do this for a living shouldn't feel ashamed or embarrassed if they can't get it right 100% of the time.
Sure. So yeah, I have a an incident something that occurred to me when it was during COVID when my wife and I were selling things on eBay, and like a lot of people out there that were trying to make a couple extra dollars, and we had a problem with our account and with our bank on eBay, and we were looking for help, and all we got were these online, all right, knowledge articles and things like that. And we wanted to speak to somebody, and we just couldn't find the number. So I Googled eBay support phone number, and first thing that popped up, I called. The guy answered the phone and said, "I'm eBay support. How can I help you?" And he says, and I said, "I'm having an issue with my account, adding my account to the my bank account." And he said, "All right, well, um, what's your username?" And I gave him my username, and he turned around and says, "All right, I'm going to send you a one-time passcode." And I got this text message, and I read him the number. He goes, "Great. I mean, you're okay. We can continue. What problem are you having?" And I was telling him what happened, and we, and about 10, 15 minutes, I got off the phone with him, and I realized that what I had done is that put myself in the situation because I wanted the help. So I was my worst enemy in
Hmm.
this situation. And I was kicking myself about it, and called my bank right away and told them what I had done. and and they fixed it. But at the end of the day, it was no harm, but it was embarrassing, because I was thinking, how could I have fallen for something like that? And
It, and
it
it, it's
happened.
and it's interesting because that story is so consistent with so many people that at any other time in any other situation you probably wouldn't have done that. But there was a very specific set of circumstances where everything aligned just right, and in the moment it made sense.
It's exactly what I always say is you have to be on your game 100% of the time. The reality is the attacker, he can fail 1,000 times, 10,000 times. He only has to get it right once.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between the two sides here.
And that's one of these really challenges with entities that I guess everybody needs cybersecurity, but larger organizations that have cybersecurity teams and network security teams and network operations teams is you've now got a whole bunch of moving parts and a whole bunch of moving people that have got to get it right all the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, with those types of groups, where are some of the ways that these things break down and leave opportunities for the adversaries to get in?
Well, it's probably a lot of times that will happen is not everybody is going to be full victim and prey, to a specific type of attack, whether it's an email attack or if it's a text message or even a phone call, if it happens to be that. Most people will ignore it and delete it, but then they won't. They'll be too lazy to report it to their IT team
Hmm.
to socialize within the organization. And I think that's a potential risk because not everybody is in the same place at the same time. You know, I could be half asleep and I can get a message and I can click on a link, or I might have been expecting a package or something like that. But you know, it's a matter of, you know, they're going to attack everybody. They're going to look for, and it comes down to making sure organizations are training their people. And I've noticed an evolution in the training these days, that it's more fun, it's more interesting, it's
Mhm.
more entertaining. And I think that that's something we learned, that the boring stuff just doesn't work. You know, it just doesn't cut it anymore. You know, we're very visual. We are very used to mediums that we're listening to things, we're watching things on TV. We need to be entertained.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that people are, we're getting their attention. And I think that's critical.
So it's kind of moving towards that cybersecurity edutainment is the phrase.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah,
But I know that I like, I don't work in a corporate office for a corporate entity anymore. But the times that I did, and people that I know, you receive the annual cybersecurity training, and it's like, hey, if you get an email that says you should click on this link, what should you do? A, click on the
yeah,
link. B, delete the email. C, turn off your computer and run out of the office.
right. But I think that we've kind of gotten a little bit past that. I've noticed an
Yeah.
evolution in the training as being part of the corporate world, and it's a big difference between the trainings that I saw working at at a large organization, um, 15 years ago versus today, where
Hmm.
now it's more entertaining and they're learning from, we're in a, it's a different world. You know, we're passing the baton to the next
Yeah.
generation of technology, and we have to keep in mind that we're still in the infancy of technology here. It's you and I have grown up in
Yeah.
during a different time, when you remember a time before computers.
Hmm.
Could you remember the time before computers? You know, where
A
you
lot of
didn't
people
have a
can't.
PC. I can't remember that time. You know, I remember, having the conversation. How many times I speak to a person who's in the, who's been around as long as I have, and I go, what was your first computer? What was my first computer? And
So what was it?
well, a TSR 80, a Radio
Okay.
Shack. My first experience with a computer actually was in elementary school, going way back in the day in the 70s, and it was a mainframe. And I remember playing a little football game on this teleprompter. I can't even remember what it looked like, but it was called football when it was. But yeah,
I think I'm trying to remember whether it was a VIC 20 or a Commodore 64 for me.
I liked the Commodore 64. It had a floppy.
Yes. And we had the 300 baud modem and the cassette. Well, I think we had a cassette tape, so that must have been the VIC 20 that had the cassette tapes for
Yeah,
loading stuff. Everyone who's listening is like, "What is a cassette tape, and why would you use it with a computer?"
sure. That's how the first viruses came about, my friend.
I remember those the copy parties where you'd get a room with a bunch of people and copy games, and all of a sudden everything is infected.
That's right. Yeah.
So what are like, from a perspective of corporate cybersecurity, what are the things that kind of keep them up night, that make them concerned of, are we going to be able to respond to incidents properly? Or are we going to be a Sony and not know that we've been compromised for months at end? What are kind of some of the things that keep those professionals up at night?
Well, I think what it kind of comes down to is exposure and exploitability.
Hmm.
And Skybox, when we consult and we speak to our organizations around vulnerabilities and threats, that organization have. We talk about these two terms, the exposure side and the exploitability side. And and for a lot of cybersecurity professionals and IT people coming up, we kind of use these two things synonymously. But we feel they're separated in many ways. Exposure is around knowing where I can get to, whereas exploitability means, are there vulnerabilities that can be exploited, the known vulnerabilities? And not being able to marry these two areas together is a tremendous gap in an organization, because at the end of the day, we say, well, if I have a vulnerability, I know what to do. I just patch my system.
Yeah.
And you say, well, that's the solution. Of course, I keep up on all my security patches. The reality is with organizations, and here's where the fundamental thing that keeps people up at night is functionality comes first and foremost. I need to run my business, and my business requires technology. And if this technology is not available to the consumers of my product, I don't make money, I'm out of business. So functionality comes first before security. And this is really kind of comes back. Remember a few months ago, CrowdStrike. What happened? Well, we have a patch. What did it do? It downed everything.
Yeah.
It caused major worldwide outages. So we require, prior to introducing that patch, that upgrade, is that we go through formal testing and make sure this isn't going to break something, isn't going to bring down the house. And if it's a choice between accepting the risk versus not having an operational environment, organizations are going to choose accept the risk.
Yeah.
And Skybox says, well, there are other security controls out there. What about them? And if we don't know as an organization about all your security controls, if, for example, let's say I have to patch an Oracle system, and we find a vulnerability on that system. What do? I go, well, patching. Well, I haven't tested the patch yet. I can't do it. What are the security controls I have? Well, I have a firewall with an IPS system in place. Can I leverage that to mitigate this risk?
Yeah.
And if we don't know, if the teams cannot communicate with each other, and we know about the capabilities of these other technologies, we can't act fast. And we have this exposure window.
So what is happening of why these two teams, the security and the network teams, aren't working together, maybe, or communicating as closely as they should?
Complexity, a lack of commonality of communication, of knowing language between each other, knowing being open and transparent, knowing, we're prone to be more reactive than being proactive.
Yeah.
And I think that the only really way to be proactive is to know about potential risk, and then sitting there and looking at prioritizing and looking at ways to mitigate these risks. You'll never be 100%.
Yeah.
Just the same thing goes for the human being. We all make mistakes. We trip on the sidewalk. We didn't see where the pebble in the road.
Yeah.
It happens. But the reality is, we can, we have to deal with the most obvious things. We want to sit there. We must sit there and start with these first. And I think that organizations that understand security look at it as a journey and not a destination,
Hmm.
and look at it as a maturity level. And at Skybox, we believe we're the framework that can glue that commonality between the network, the SOC and the NOC, to make sure that these two areas are communicating correctly.
So what are some of the things that kind of hinder that communication and that collaboration? Is it just kind of turf wars, or are there more fundamental issues that kind of keep these teams separate?
Well, in some ways, it's a turf war. That's a it's a valid point. I think it's also that we can't afford we may have gaps in
Hmm.
technologies. We may be looking at cost. And I think that most organizations, feel that, and we did a study, and we said that 90% said that they had these communication channels between these organizations. But then they also sat there and they said that 76% of them said that the failure was due to a breakdown in communication. So the perceived threat versus the reality are kind of the problem here.
Hmm.
And I think that it comes down to the fact that we're still learning. We're still learning how to deal with this. But I think we're getting better. I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's a journey. It's not, it's, you do what you can afford. And I don't poo-poo any security mechanism that you put in place. I think
Yeah.
they're all critical.
Yeah, so it's I think it's one of those challenges that every business works through, and it's not just a security and the network operations team, but sometimes marketing and compliance. They're in different silos. They have kind of different functions that may set them up towards not being as communicative. We have different goals. The sales team's goal is sell as much stuff as possible. The compliance team's goal is don't let the company get in trouble. And those
Sure.
things don't always lead to the same decisions. And I could see the same thing with security and network people. Well, let me just turn off all the network. Let me turn off all the connectivity, and therefore you can't. you
Yeah.
know, no one can get there.
Look, the networking people have their priorities, and the security people have their priorities. Security people concern themselves with vulnerabilities. The application concern themselves with functionality. When the product's not working, they're the ones that are going to be yelled at. So it has to work, number one. So, and time to market is critical. It's absolutely critical. With any any product in general, is it really comes down to what's going to give me the quickest time to value.
Hmm.
And security kind of sometimes stands in the way,
Yeah.
and they have to work together. So I think that what we've learned, and what we've kind of have really as a culture of security and IT is to take an approach of of starting out with security first in mind. And when we do this, we're building a better mousetrap.
Hmm.
So, but at the same time, it's we see shortcuts in organizations. We see shortcuts in technologies. People still using, Java out there. And at the end of the day, is their inherent problem,
Yeah.
that we're trying to move away from. So
Do you see better security practices in younger entities versus older entities? In terms of, I could see if I'm starting a company now, I'm going to be more inclined to try to build security into my processes with respect to the computers. In opposition to, let's say a company that sells life insurance that's been around for 120 years, that has done everything with paper and pencil for decades, and now are trying to figure out how to bring computers into an existing process as opposed to someone who's designing a process with computers in mind from the beginning.
Yeah, no, I've I've never really looked at it except to say that from it really makes more sense that a younger startup would be building out with security in mind. I think that they're uh, they're starting out with with different technologies. They're going to cloud. They're they're leveraging security products that are vetted by these cloud providers. So I think that, yeah, I think that I would say that without having any real data
Yeah.
behind it, my mind says you're probably right about the younger. Whereas the more mature legacy 100-year-old companies that have nothing to do with technology and are the clothing manufacturer,
Yeah.
and they sit there and say, well, what do I need a computer for? Might look at well, you told me I needed a firewall, I'm done, right? And so is it possible that there that the adoption is much more difficult? I think it is a cost factor. I mean, I
Mhm.
think it comes down to money a lot of times. Is that we, you know, it it's a it is it a problem? I mean, it's a sort of a we're, it depends on the direction of the organization.
Yeah. Because I feel like I could probably almost make the argument the opposite way also, in that a well-established organization maybe has, we've got our fundamentals down right, we know where we can invest in our resources, we've got profit that we can, we've got margin that we can apply to building a good infrastructure, and that brand new company is, hey, if we don't get to market, we don't have a product, we have no profit, we're out of business, and so let's just skip the security. We'll come back to it later.
Maybe. I mean, it's it's a mixture. I mean, I
Yeah,
work with a lot of different organizations. I mean, I consult with organizations with tens of thousands of employees and some with you know a few dozen. So I don't really kind of split my time based on size
yeah,
and quantifying. It's more of need. So when I speak to a customer, and and I see some small organizations that are incredibly restrictive and locked down, and it's almost problematic.
hmm,
It's almost problematical in terms of, all right, we need this tool, and they turn around and they say, we I can't download that tool. It has to go through this whole process to get it. So it's days or even weeks before we can even get started. And then larger organizations oh, we have this infrastructure in place and we can give you access and you'll have a jump system to be able to do work and to help us out. So it's it's all over the map.
hmm,
And I think that that's kind of the reason why we have more and more security controls being put in place around regulatory
yeah.
requirements and around privacy regulations out there. I just wish the US would come up with a national privacy law, but to make it easier for all of us. But, you know, that appears to be something political in some way.
Yeah,
But that's another story.
that's yeah, that's another topic for another day. So, are there some like core best practices for organizations who like, okay, we know we've got a cybersecurity team, we've got a network team. How do we get them to work better together? How do we kind of up our game across the board?
Well, I think cross training is probably at the forefront of it all.
Hmm.
If your organization should be able to work together and train together to learn about security, when we talk about an organization from business perspective, we learn a business language around our organization and a security language that we could speak to. And that ultimately will make it better. I mean, I think cross training, collaboration, doing exercises together, training exercises, doing testing together, I think will ultimately give you that baseline metrics to work towards something better,
Hmm.
to increase that communication. I mean, and that kind of comes back to the my whole disaster recovery days, and keeping business continuity going in an organization. But we need to run these simulations as an organization and see how would we react. We also need to make sure that security people, when we ask for certain access, that we're testing and we're understanding that risk prior to implementation, and having multiple teams look at the same information and discuss their perspective on it. I always say we're better together.
Yeah.
I don't care if I'm talking to somebody that's a CISO or a junior engineer. I ask them both their opinion. I want to know both of them, because somebody's might see something, and I think that, and we really haven't talked about it, but I mean, I'll kind of bring it up to you as a question. Is I I think that there are some cultural gaps that we have out there of communication that we're still trying to learn
Yeah.
as we become more and more globalized. Because some cultures, it's, if you're speaking to a guy that's a VP, you're not going to question him or
Yeah.
say something. You might be thinking, wait a minute, I'm not allowed to do that, because in my culture, that's not how it works. I need to follow this process in order to do something. And I think that we're as we globalize, we're learning how to do that more. And as somebody that's a New Yorker, I I kind of almost pull it out of them. And I find this a lot of times. It's like, what do you think? And I might be talking to somebody that feels like he can't really speak up. I said,
Yeah.
what would you do if you were in charge? So, but I think that it builds confidence. When you start doing it once, it's uncomfortable. You do it again and again. It's repetition. You will get better, and and it's like anything else. It's a muscle.
Yeah,
You know, it's
I've heard some great kind of scenarios around security of really trying to elicit responses from a wide range of people, because my background is different than your background. I will see
sure,
there are things that I will see that you won't see just because of your life experiences and because of the way things work, and some strengths at companies ultimately turn into weaknesses. Um, I had a
sure.
guest on once that her job was physical penetration into companies, and finding, where physical security is failing. And she was doing a walkthrough prior to her attempt, and the person she was talking to was like, we're really really good about following the rules around here and not questioning the rules. And so she's like, okay. And on her way out, she stuck a piece of paper on a door and said, under no circumstances do you lock this door. And so everybody saw the sign and went, okay, I've been told not to lock the door. And that was her way in, because everybody followed the rules.
That's
and
great.
and everybody was taught to not question the rules.
Yeah,
And so, like, I think like you're talking, like, I think that works true in security, of someone who's young and was talking with his college buddies about some hacking incident is going to see something different than a CISO who's thinking probably more on the business side of things.
sure. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Is this the sort of thing that that Skybox helps facilitate these types of discussions, or is this more of a mantra for you?
No, well, the physical
Yeah,
security stuff is not really our purview. I find it to be a fascinating topic because it's dumpster diving and all
yeah,
those other techniques they all seem like fun activities to run through a test in an organization. Um, from an ethical point of view, I'm not a
yeah.
not a bad guy point of view, but it sounds like a fun test and an idea and practicing certain things, um, and but what I do is we talk to organizations about gaps in security. When are you doing this? Are you doing this? And why? And we ask. I mean, and a lot of times it is it's cost
Yeah.
is probably comes up probably the most. But what I find the organizations that are most concerned um, have do in fact have a regulatory requirement. The ones that have to speak to the auditor,
Yeah.
and I say the auditor in in my perception, an auditing is a security mechanism. It's the verification phase of anything, and we should, the idea, I always used to say trust but verify because that comes from my old military days,
Yeah.
and I don't think we really say that anymore because now I think that's no longer viable. You can't say trust and verify. That means you let them in, but then you check and make sure should you have done that or not, and it's already too late. So I think I would say verify and then trust.
Hmm.
It would be better. Would be a better way to go about it. But I do talk to a lot of when I work with organizations, it's always a process. You never know where it's going to go, the conversation,
Hmm.
but it's never a one and done.
Yeah.
It never is. You
Well,
have to stay up.
that's
Yeah,
because no organization is ever static.
sure.
You're always adding resources, you're adding inventory, you're changing processes. If your business isn't changing, it's going out of business.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. There's there's a lot to be said about that. I mean, I see a lot of organizations moving to the cloud. I remember going to the virtualization days, and at first it was lots of resistance, and
Yeah.
now it's everything is virtualized. Now it's everything is. Can we go to the cloud? Can we go to the cloud? Is it more secure? Is it less secure? It's debatable either way. I mean, you can argue either side.
I know a small company that had a small organization that had an auditor come in and they kind of did their standard auditing things and said, well, you don't have a good, we want to see a disaster recovery plan. And they're like, well, we don't have anything. It's like
Sure.
everything is like their entire organization, everything was in the cloud. It's maybe there's disaster recovery in terms of, well, what does the entity that we're using do for disaster recovery? But for themselves, it was like, well, we don't have anything like physical that we have to recover.
Yeah, that's why it's very attractive.
Yeah. And is that one of the things that kind of makes your job fun? Is that every organization that you work with is a little bit different, has different gaps, has different strengths and weaknesses, and your job is to try to find those little nuggets.
Well, it's not about finding them. It's more about growing it. When where it probably the most satisfaction I get from an organization when they see the value of the security, and that's sometimes tough to quantify.
Hmm.
In an organization is we. I think it's an organization that, going back to the whole legacy versus new organizations, is legacies kind of look at security as an operational cost.
Yeah.
it's not a profit center. But without the security, you don't have the profit. If security is breached, you have fines, you have loss of intellectual property, loss of credit card information. You have a whole bunch of things that could pretty much shut you down forever. I mean, especially if you have a mandate for PCI. I go back to an incident occurred in 2012 where I was doing consulting, and it was a large organization, and they had a public loss of hundreds of thousands of credit card numbers, and and security was at the top, was was so lacking in the organization that it required, you know, they were they had to deal with the federal government, and they were told they were going to lose their contracts with Mastercard and Visa, and unless they dealt with these issues, and they had to address it, and it was a grueling process. So, and it cost a lot. It changed a lot of people's lives that were lost their positions because of it. So I think security is everybody's responsibility, and I think that it's a team effort. Security is a team sport,
Yeah.
so to speak. It's we work as a community, and I think what you do is incredibly important because you're educating the community, and we're on the same side. You don't have a dark hoodie and
No.
and a mask on saying here's how you hack Office 365, to get back at your ex-wife. You're helping you're on the good guy side. So it's critical that we maintain that, and it's great that people listen to these things
Yeah.
and look for it, because we only get better with education. The future is even more complicated.
Yes. We won't go there with all the problems that we foresee in the future. We got to deal with the here and now first.
Sure, sure.
So as we wrap up here, any parting advice or particular resources people need to read this, people need to know about this?
Well, I would say that, if you're an organization that is grasping with the concept of marrying these two technologies, our Skybox, we have a wealth of documentation that we offer up, free, or virtually free. So it's if you go there, we have things to look at. I would say that um, my advice to everybody is to stay up on the free resources that are out there, and these organizations that are really designed to keep us alerted to vulnerabilities and threats that are out there. I subscribe to CISA's threat feed, and I get emails every single day, and among others that are out there, and I think that's key, is to maintain and be informed.
Yeah. Information is key. If people want to find you in Skybox online, where can they find you guys?
So you can find us at www.skybox.security.com. And I am on LinkedIn. I'm pretty much an open book, so you can find me easily. My Howard Goodman, and I'm a technical director at Skybox Security. So you can find me on LinkedIn, and please connect with me.
And we'll make sure to, for those listening, link to those in the show notes so that you can find them and you don't have to worry about mistyping them and ending up on some other place that you don't want to be. Howard, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you, Chris. I enjoyed it.